I think everyone in society can pretty much agree that to make a compelling story, we have to have some sort of action. The same goes for video games. Some of the most intense and memorable moments of these games are the battles, the boss fights. Sometimes you're battling dragons. Sometimes you are conquering giants. And other times you're just blowing the hell out of demons. But let's admit it, it's fun, we love it, and that's one of the reasons why we play. Today I'll be focusing on two specific genres, mostly in the cinematic realm of modern video games. This will be fantasy and sci-fi battle music. So strap in and get ready, because this is Video Game Music, Episode 2, Battle Music. Alright guys, so battle music, there's a lot to cover here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start really basic and then slowly build up into something more complex and more advanced. Now, what I'm going to be focused on mostly is orchestral cinematic hybrid music. Why? Because that is the most popular today. Someone asked about chiptune music in the last video in the comments. Now I do want to cover chiptune music, but today that is absolutely a niche. Because I said it would be out of place with modern, like really realistic visuals. It obviously fits better with those old 8-bit visuals, which is a popular genre, but it's very niche. It's not the mainstream. I mean, look at the games that you see today on Xbox and the most downloaded games on Steam, stuff like that. So right here, this is a really short 30-second track. I barely even remember it, but I was scrolling through old projects. As you can see here, the name of this is just Battle Loop 1. Now, if I remember correctly, this was a client who wanted a short 30-second something he could loop, and it was for like a real-time strategy game, and I think it was a modern military game. So if you look here in my project settings, project info, total time spent on it, 42 minutes, including the time I've had it open just now. So originally it was about half hour that I made this track, and I made it on December 26th, 2017. How much did I get paid for this track? I believe it was about $50, give or take. And I was licensing it. They do not own the rights to this. I still own the track. They're allowed to use it. It's been licensed to them for their game. So we'll talk a bit more about that as well. So this is what it sounds like. It's insanely basic. So that was it. That was all I wanted. He just wanted 30 seconds. Now I charge based on complexity too. So if you want to be a game composer, you're going to have to sort this kind of stuff out. I charge at different tiers basically. This one, up to 8 instruments, it's a certain amount per minute. That's the lowest you can go. Then it goes up to about 16, and then I have 24. If they want over 24, they're going to have to pay for an additional 8 based on rates per minute. That is the standard, not hourly, but how much you write based on how many minutes of music, okay? So also rates for licensing is what you really want to do most of the time, are going to be different than a full buyout. And if you're just starting out, you really might be working for like $25 per minute, maybe even $25 for a whole 2-minute song, or you might even work for free. Why? Because you have to prove yourself, right? It's competitive. It's cutthroat. Absolutely. I did my first thing. I think I made $25 for a 2-minute song, just like I just said. And, we signed contracts. I made sure this was my music. He was allowed to use it in his game, and I had to be credited. Okay? We can go more into that as well. But rates are such a thing. People don't want to talk about it. People don't want to say how much they make. That's how much I made for my first songs. I made $25 for a 2-minute song. Now, this track here, what I did with it, this is just an intro. Now, even if they do not have a dynamic music engine, they can still place things so that when the battle starts, they'll have this intro, and then they will have another track going right after it on a loop. So this is just the intro. So I would classify this song more in the sci-fi genre, even though it's more modern military. Sci-fi, you're going to want epic percussion, synthesizers, strings, brass, and some kind of percussion. Sci-fi is going to be much more heavily processed than a fantasy track. Sci-fi, you really don't need woodwinds or anything like that. And this was for a really basic game, so I wouldn't really need that much realism, to be honest. Let's look at what I use for this, because this is unchanged. I did add this. I had a different library that I don't have installed anymore for this kind of riser. All I did between now and then, when I first wrote it, was add this gravity, which was an effect. It was similar to what I was using, but it's a bit better. Anyway, action strikes for the percussion. This is big cinematic hits. All I did was a very simple pattern. Percussion and string ostinatos are going to be your best friend when you start writing something like this. This is obviously very simple, but I made money off this track, and he used it. This is exactly what he wanted. For a really simple game, this is what you want. Sometimes you don't want something crazy. And then strings. Everything I used, I think, was from the Contact Factory library. Like I told you guys, I was using Complete 10 Ultimate. Everything I used here, damage, strings, brass, besides serum, everything was from the Complete 10 Ultimate, which is in the Contact Factory library. That's pretty much as basic as you can get. But with that being said, know that you don't need like crazy expensive libraries. I mean, Complete is kind of expensive, but it's a huge value. And I made tracks professionally and got paid with it using just the Contact Factory library. So there's your proof right there. So let's go back. And this was just a loop. So this would be looping as you're playing the battle. So as you can hear, it's super, super simple. Just these percussion hits. Now when you're writing percussion lines, I actually didn't even really do it as well as I should have back then. As you can see, you want to alter your velocity. Same with strings, to make it sound more realistic. But I guess this also shows you I used the same velocity for all this. This was, so long ago, and I did it quickly. Let's see, what's Serum doing here? There's a ton of reverb on that. So yeah, that's it. So I have this string ostinato. It's all staying in the root of D here. I'm using not even a triad, a chord with 3 notes. It's just 2 notes, okay? So you want to add harmonies like that. You don't just want, solid notes. If I just had these notes, it wouldn't be nearly as interesting as having these harmonies. And as you notice, as the track progresses, I get more complex with the harmonies. And instead of repeating there at the end, it kind of goes up. So when you have something going up in scale like that, it gives you a sense of forward progression and kind of victory. You know, it goes up, it just is kind of an uplifting feel right there at the very end. And then it repeats back to the beginning. So yeah, this is Action Strike's part of complete. All the drums do is very simple. So drums, that's actually pretty simple. I would definitely program something more complex than that today, but this is just the basic rundown. So let's check out what Serum is doing here. I think there's, let's see what kind of, yeah, that's gross beat, okay? FL Studio gross beat. You can get a similar effect with like a trance gate or something like from Melda Productions. They have a multi-band rhythmizer is what it's called. Anyway, that's what I mean about really highly processed stuff in sci-fi. So it's kind of just underscore. It's hard to hear with the whole thing, but it gives it this glitchy kind of movement. Perfect for sci-fi music. If you've ever listened to the Doom soundtrack, which I had a clip of, you know, very highly influential. It has a lot of glitchy, really aggressive, distorted effects. And it's not always guitar. It's often synthesizers that are these glitched out, distorted sounds. So let's check out the brass. Super simple, no legato, that is just straight sustains. And then same with the strings. The strings only appear, the long strings, excuse me. Again, Contact Factory, long strings only appear at the very end here. Now what I would do differently today is I would probably glue these all together so that you don't, you know, you hear that swell, it's very synthetic sounding. You know, obviously that's up to you, but you hear how that long note, it kind of ties everything together to have that one note sustaining as opposed to them kind of swell and then cut off and then swell and cut off. It's just, it's about the attack of those strings there. That's why you usually want to use legato for a changing melody like that. And then damage. Everyone knows damage, heaviosity damage, loops that just work, but they're so recognizable. I still use them all the time, but let's see what damage does here. So even though this track is old, I'll tell you, I pretty much guarantee how I started it. I start out with percussion, and then I add string ostinatos. I add the short notes first, the big hits, a sense of rhythm to start it off with, especially for a short loop like this. You want a sense of rhythm. Honestly, sometimes you can think of it more as an electronic dance music song, which is why I love FL Studio so much for this. You want a steady sense of rhythm, not a lot of pauses. You want that steady 4/4 constantly driving you forward, because this is just going to loop and it's just going to be background music for the game. You're going to be focused on the action. And as long as it's, you know, steadily moving, steadily driving, boom, 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 you will, you know, continue that intensity in the game, and you'll be focused on the battle. And the music will just complement that. You don't want to distract from the gameplay or anything like that. You just want it to all kind of fit together. Simple game, simple music. One more thing is, how do we make this loop seamlessly? So what I told you I would do is, even if they don't have a dynamic music engine, you know, Fmod or something like that, they can, you know, implement stuff like this where this intro plays at the start of the battle, and then this will loop for the rest of the battle until it's continued. Also, they might have you add like a little victory jingle, which I will show you in the next one. Now, to make something loop, I would send him that intro with all of the, I would delete that pattern and then send him this intro and let those reverb tails ring out for as long as they can. So then I would export this loop and piece it together. Now, the biggest thing is making sure that those reverb tails at the end of this track, because it's going to ring out. If it just cuts off, it's going to be so noticeable when it loops. You know, the end's going to happen, and you expect those strings, those brass to like ring out like a normal, you know, track would at the ending, but it would wrap right around to the beginning, and the reverb would just cut off. So FL Studio has something very useful. Just save it as whatever. Okay, so battle loop 1, right here in the tail, wrap remainder. That will wrap those reverb tails right around back to the beginning. Now, it also might be beneficial to start with just, let's say I use this, and instead of doing that big thing, what I would do is this. Obviously, it's going to be a bit glaring because it's so short. If it's a longer loop, it's going to work better. But just cut that intro in half, put it the same thing first and backwards. That way, there's really not going to be that much reverb on those drums, as much as like strings. You know, strings are going to ring out a lot more or something like that. But if you don't have FL Studio, what I do in like Cubase or Studio One, I'm still new to Cubase, so there might be a thing about this, but with Studio One, there is no way to export a loop that wraps perfectly. So all I would do is literally just take this 3 times, just like that, and then export just this middle section. Highlight it and then export just the middle section. Why? Because that's going to have the reverb from this first part ring into there, and then it's going to, you know what I mean, it's going to act like the reverb's going there and then right around to the beginning when really it's just the middle section. Anyway, that's a basic workaround for something like that. Now, let's go on to something a little more complex. Okay, this song is way more complex and lengthy. So let's look at our project info. This was started 2018. It's either April 6th or July 4th. I don't know. I think it's July 4th, 2018. Time spent on it, 11 hours, 4 minutes. So this is more in the fantasy realm. And we'll look at all our different layers here. And I've got ghost notes going on. So whatever is, happening, you'll see all those different grayed out notes there. I'll start with strings. Yeah, okay, here we go. So let's start off with the essentials. Like I said last time, string ostinatos, percussion, brass. I usually start with those. With an action song, it's best, again, to start with percussion and string ostinatos, which are those short, like this. So this goes back to what I said about velocity. If I had all these notes playing at the exact same velocity, it would sound not nearly as good. You want that realism because a string player isn't going to be playing full blast every single note. They can't, physically do that. They're going to be rocking the bow back and forth. Like, think about things like that when you're writing for like a legato string line. There's going to be a swell in volume. As the player is bowing across, it's going to get a little bit louder, and stuff like that are things to consider. So I kind of start with the basic composition first, with the meat. Strings, brass, melody, chords, and structure. You develop that first, and then I add textures and what I call ear candy. Risers, hits, textures like this. It's a strings low swarm. So they're playing like that. There's a sense of life and movement to it. That's the biggest thing that makes things sound real, is to modulate dynamics, so you have the brass swell up and stuff like that, instead of just playing all at the same velocity, like here with my horns. So you hear that, how it rises and falls like a real orchestra would as these players are blowing into the instrument. They can't just, go full blast all the time. Things like that. Adding a pause for breath is helpful as well. So let's check out the cellos. So about strings and brass, for realism, you're really going to want to pan things accordingly. Think about how a real orchestra is situated, right? This is some of the most basic stuff you can get for a really realistic sound. Cellos are going to be to one side, violins are going to be to the other. Brass or horns are going to be the same side as the violins, and then trombones and trumpets are going to be the same side as the cellos. Now, all you really need to do is look at like an orchestral seating chart to figure all that stuff out. But it can add so much realism. So what I would do is just pan all this to the right slightly. Again, it's not going to play much difference when you're just playing it by itself. But people who know like what real orchestras sound like, little things like this are going to add so much depth and realism to it. So let's check out the string ostinato. We did a little bit, but again, this goes back to dynamics and how I have this swelling up. And then for like the big ending here, like the big climax, that's when I use the high strings, the violin shorts, the most. A great way to transition between different measures is to add a cymbal swell and then a crash. So it just sounds like this. And then use timpanis. I love using timpanis in fantasy. A lot of times timpanis are kind of overlooked for the more big epic percussion, but timpani rolls and hits are really, really good. Now let's see our main melody once everything gets going, because that's really important. to kind of build the track. Start with that structure, the ostinatos, you build your chords, you build your mood, you kind of progress everything. Progression is really key in battle music, but not constant progression. You want kind of move in waves. You know, the intro, start everything up, have a nice swell, let everything kind of build up crazy, and then strip it down. Because if you just continued to build, it would be really relentless and there would be not much structure to it. So everything hits, you have the huge brass swell, and then it kind of gets stripped back down. As the choir and as the brass rings out, we hear just the subtle strings building with the choir and everything like that. And then the same once it goes here. It's very, very intense, but that is actually pretty stripped down compared to what I was just doing. I had the brass, I had everything, and then right here it just goes right straight into just percussion, and it keeps that driving movement going forward, but it doesn't overwhelm you with too many layers all coming in at once. It focuses back towards the main core of the track. All right, so let's go to our melody here, which is mostly the strings and horns which are going to lead this melody. And then I have it, bring it all back, and then we have the huge... So really, you can hear what makes this track kind of stand out. It's all about like the production value and that ear candy, right? I have the risers, I have the hits, I have the huge Brahm sound, which we all love. I can't get enough of it. Everybody loves that sound, no matter how played out it is. This is what people want right now. People always ask for it. They're like the big brassy boom, and I'm like, the Brahm, yeah, that's what we call it. So you notice that a lot of what really sells this track are the little details like that. I have the Brahms, I have the sound design elements down, which are almost sometimes more important than your composition. This is why I said earlier in the first video that sample quality is so important. Because if I didn't have those really, the transitions, the cymbal swells, if everything didn't sound like that, because these are like, top-notch libraries that are made to just work. I mean, this one alone, you can hear the Brahms from this, Keep Forest Evolution. You can hear this in so many tracks, in trailers, in games. I've heard it in The Division 2 by Ubisoft. Same with Damage. Here we go, Damage. Everyone recognizes Damage, and some people are like, I don't use it because it's so recognizable. Man, it works. I have heard Damage in multiple Assassin's Creed games. Like, people who don't know how, composition works and everything, and they don't know, and aren't composers or producers, they don't care that you're using Damage. They care that it sounds freaking badass, man. So don't be caught up in stuff where someone says, oh, it's overused, it's outdated, it's this, it's that. If it sounds good, use it. This stuff gets Replacements. Damage is in some of the biggest games available, specifically Assassin's Creed Rogue and Assassin's Creed 3. You can hear it directly on the menu and on a battle theme in Assassin's Creed Rogue, and on the menu in Assassin's Creed 3. So stuff like that. I've heard the Brahms from Keep Forest Evolution in the Division 2. So these are some of the absolute biggest games you can get. You know, these are AAA massive titles, and they use these tools right here, and you can have access to it. If it sounds good, use it, right? So that is going to be all like the ear candy that I was talking about, and everything kind of fleshes together.